So good evening, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Roger Livermore. I'm the Dean of the School of Management at AIT, and I'm introducing today's or this evening's guest speaker. The introduction really relates to the start of a new program that AIT is running, which is responding to large demand from Southeast Asian business, which is to go through and look at how technology and analytics are reshaping the business landscape now and in the future. The first speaker on this program is Kevin Pereira. He'll be running a course which is called The Business of Frontier Technology. That starts in the second weekend of August, so it runs for 3 days in August, 3 days in September for those who are not working. Those who do work will be running for the weekends in August and September. So it really takes up 2 days and 2 evenings, plus a few sessions online as well. So this evening's session is really what we call a teaser. It's an introduction to what will be taught on that particular course. So I can see that both on the webinar now, as well as on Facebook Live, we've got people who have actually already joined that particular program. And for them, they're going to go and get an introduction into what this course has to offer. I also see that we have MBA students, we have MSc students in international finance, who are also thinking about choosing this course as an elective. So we welcome you as well. And we also welcome those of you who are thinking about doing this particular course as a short course over those 40 or so hours in August and September. And I'll be using the chat function to be able to go through and talk to you about the short courses that are available at AIT, particularly this particular short course. The other thing I would like to say before we get started is that there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So for those of you who would like to ask questions at the end of Kevin's presentation, I would like you to go through and use the Q&A box. It's much easier to go through and follow a train of questions in that particular box. So please do not use the chat box if you would like to ask Kevin any questions. Okay, so that's all the formalities over and done with. You are really here this evening to go through and listen to Kevin speak. He was actually talking earlier today, I hear, to Harvard Business School alumni. So this is the second presentation he's been doing today around this subject area, which is on top of his busy day job. And he'll introduce himself and what his day job is. But Kevin, thank you so much for giving up your time this evening to introduce this particular course. Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Roger. And good evening, everyone. Glad you could be with us tonight. So what today I'm going to do, as per what Roger said, I'm going to, introduce myself a little bit, and then introduce the course, and also then, as Roger put it, have a little bit of a teaser for a few parts of the course, which hopefully will, excite you and make you think about not only just this course, but really what is frontier technologies, right? What is actually coming. And I think ultimately that will serve, hopefully, to spark your curiosity. So in terms of getting started then, so quickly, a bit of an introduction of myself. So I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and I did my undergraduate degree in business, so specialized in finance management and marketing. And post-undergrad, I actually went to work in finance over in private banking with Citigroup in New York City. Did private banking for about 6 years, and then at a certain point realized that making rich people richer was almost making my soul darker and darker. So I decided to make a change from a career standpoint. And so I went to get my MBA over at a school called INSEAD, which has a campus in France and a campus in Singapore. And after that, I decided two things. So number one, I didn't want to continue in finance. Number two, I wanted a little bit of an adventure. So to combine those two things, I went to work actually at a startup in Myanmar that was doing internet infrastructure. So basically anything that is related to the operation of your phone is basically internet infrastructure. So you can think it's fiber optic in the ground, it's the cell towers that take the signals from your phone to the cell towers, and then also it's data centers as well, right, where you can house a lot of data. We can certainly talk a little bit about my experience over in Myanmar if that's an area of questions that people have. So I did a lot of frontier markets work in Myanmar and looked really at how technology is being used there, which I thought was a very exciting area. And then after that, I joined a company called Blue Artificial Intelligence. And on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about that. So Blue Artificial Intelligence basically does strategy consulting with a focus on AI. And when we first started, we actually thought that, oh, there's so much interest in AI, everyone's talking about it. If we start doing consulting there, we'll have a ton of people that come to us. And what we actually found was very, very few people were coming to us. And so we were a little bit concerned about that. And when we asked around in the market, why is that potentially happening? I think a lot of people told us that when we think of artificial intelligence, they had two overwhelming emotions. One was fear, and the other was confusion, right? And we realized that in order to address those, you really had to focus on education. And that's why we started doing a lot of conferences, workshops, training sessions for large corporates. And that part of our business actually really took off. Related to that, I also teach in Hong Kong at the University of Hong Kong and the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And I teach artificial intelligence courses for MBAs and also big data and finance courses for MBAs. So that's kind of the teaching aspect. And I've really enjoyed the teaching aspect thus far. And so when Roger talked to me about potentially doing this at AIT, I was actually really excited. So that's really the genesis for why I've come aboard and why I'll be teaching the course called The Business of Frontier Technologies. So in a nutshell, what's this course gonna contain, right? So the way I'm seeing it is that at the beginning, we'll do a little bit of an introduction. And because my background is in artificial intelligence, I think I'm going to focus the sort of business of frontier technologies more with a artificial intelligence lens. Okay, so that's my specialty, that's my slant, and so that's the direction of which I'm going to be heading in. So in order to get everyone in the course up to speed, the first part is really going to be dedicated to the basics of AI, and related to that also the pieces around data, because data is really the fuel that's needed for AI to actually run. After that, we'll talk a little bit about the artificial intelligence methods. So within AI, there's a lot of different branches, right? Some of which I've mentioned here: machine learning, natural language processing, machine vision. And even if you know nothing about that, that's totally fine. Okay, my assumption going into this is that most people will have never seen a lot of these technologies. And so I'm going to try and introduce them in a way that will be more of a business focus, right? So we're not going to really do Python or coding. It's really going to be focusing on what are the business applications of this, because I feel like folks who are studying the subjects that you are, MBAs, and folks in those types of programs, I think it's really important that you understand what are the business applications. So we'll talk a little bit about the technologies. Then we'll also talk about the use cases and the business applications of these AI methods. And then third, we're going to talk a little bit about implementation, because I think when it comes to understanding the theory, that's great, but practically, how do we see this being done, right? And so I'll relate a lot of what we talk about in that section to some of the work that I've done on the consulting side and how we've actually helped companies, organizations, and people really implement AI within their setups, right? And I think that's really important. But the fourth one, and actually probably my favorite part of the course, is really going to be about the wider impacts of AI. When I teach the course at HKU and HKUST, a lot of the MBAs actually have really good discussions with me about how this is going to affect us on a personal level. And when I say personal level, I mean more in terms of the career changes, right? So how is AI going to affect jobs of the future? How is AI going to affect careers of the future? And what are the changes in society and technology that are going to help AI move forward? Okay, so that's really going to be the final part of the course, which I think will give us somewhat of a holistic view as to the business applications of AI and also the social and ethical parts that are related to artificial intelligence as well. So that's it for the course as a whole. I think for the purposes of tonight, obviously I can't squeeze the whole course into the 40 minutes we have together. So I'm just going to pick up on a few pieces, okay? So I'll start a little bit with the basics about AI. I'll then take one method and specifically dive a little bit deep into it. It's called neural networks. If you don't understand what that is, please don't worry about it. We'll take it from scratch and I'll introduce that. And then lastly, we'll touch upon a few issues related to what the future looks like with AI, because I want to give you a little bit of a flavor as to the more philosophical parts of the course. Again, I think different pieces will appeal to different people in different varying degrees, but I still think all of this is necessary for you to get a holistic view of what AI is like and how that's going to impact the business of frontier technologies as a whole. Okay, so now that we've set the agenda, let's jump into it, right? So what is AI? That's always a big question that a lot of folks have. And if you take the phrase artificial intelligence and you type it into Google, right? Chances are you'll get something like number 1 and number 2 over here, which is some version of machines imitating intelligent human behavior. But I think the challenge with that is that the phrase intelligent human behavior is different to different people, right? What's intelligent human behavior to me and what's intelligent human behavior to Roger might be totally different. And in the industry, even the experts actually struggle with the definition, right? It's actually quite hard because it's a very wide industry with a lot of different applications. So for the purposes of our discussion tonight, and I think, a good framework to think about it for the future is that I want you to think of AI as simply a tool to achieve an objective. And I think why that's important is because, one, that makes it a lot less scary. And secondly, it puts the emphasis on what is the objective, right? What is the use case? What is the pain point you're trying to solve? Because we often see many companies come in, buy some really expensive and cool looking AI technology, and then they try to force it into a use case in their business. And that's a horrible way to do it. You should always think about what is the business use case, and then how can I use AI as one of the many potential tools for achieving, my goal. Right? And really what I'm trying to say is the goal is very important here. So for the purposes of the next sort of hour, let's think of AI as simply a tool to achieve an objective. Now, if we think about a history view, right, or historical kind of analysis of AI, I think it's important to realize that a lot of the theory and the mathematics that underlies a lot of AI has actually been around for a long time. Even since World War II, right? A lot of kind of very rudimentary AI was being used then to crack the Enigma machine. That was the German code-breaking messaging device that they were using at the time, right? And that was really one of the first kind of real applications of AI. But I think a lot of data scientists and universities and practitioners realized that although the math was there, we didn't have the technical capability to be able to use AI. And that's really been the change in the last sort of 5 years or so. These, what I would like to call 3 pillars of AI are really what support the whole operation of artificial intelligence. And those 3 pillars are computing, storage, and data transport. And part of the reason why AI has seen such a renaissance recently is that these 3 things have become exponentially more capable and exponentially less expensive, right? So you've got capability that's gone up, and you've had cost going down substantially. And those 2 things have combined to really start the AI revolution that we've recently seen. So if we look at a few of those from the perspective of real life examples, right? I think it's important for you to truly understand what I mean when I say increases in capability, right? And these are not just like incremental increases in capability. These are what we like to call exponential increases in capability. So orders of magnitude as opposed to small little changes. So if we consider this example here, we have the idea that the same amount of computing power that NASA had to send the first man to the moon is today what we see in our current smartphones, right? And just think about that for a second. Back in the day, they had rooms upon rooms of computers that were all sitting there. And today, just in our hand, that smartphone that we have has the same amount of computing power. They launched the first man to the moon in 1969, right? And today we're at 2020. So this jump has taken 50 years, right? Just 50 years. But we've gone from rooms and rooms of computers to just one small smartphone. Now, if we think also about data transport, right? I think many of you on the call might be quite young, but in my case, I remember there were days when you would connect to the internet via what we call dial-up modem, right? So the dial-up modem is basically connecting to the internet through your phone line. Now, when you connect through your phone line, the speeds are much slower, right? And so in this case, we're seeing that we have a transfer rate of 4.61 kilobytes a second, all right? And if we think about what that means to download a 180 megabyte file, at that speed, it would take 39 years, okay? Now today, if we consider a 180 megabyte file on a typical kind of 3G plus or 4G network, you're looking at less than a minute, right? So again, exponential increases in capability and a lot of decrease in terms of cost. Now, another big reason for the progression of AI is also the rate of progression in terms of time. So if we compare human evolution, right? If we look at, back in the day with the apes, and then the apes eventually end up walking upright and you have Homo sapiens, right? That process took 4 million years. If we think about what this is like in terms of AI, we can use the field of robotics as a proxy, right? As a comparison. And so when we look at kind of consider what that capability was, if we look at the most left side of the screen here, you can effectively see that we have a very simple robot, right? And this robot, in terms of walking around, was very limited. So, it wouldn't be able to walk, in terms of a range, it couldn't walk that far. It always had to be plugged in all the time. If it fell over, it had to, be helped by a human being to get up again. And literally just in 30 years, we've gone from that all the way to Asimo over here, okay? So Asimo is developed by Honda, like the car company Honda. They do a bunch of other stuff as well. And so the extent or the ability of this robot is absolutely unbelievable, right? So today it can play football with you and can even make you a drink afterwards. And just if you look at the newest evolutions and the newest exciting things that are coming in robotics, even Asimo is getting old, right, by capability standards. But again, I just wanted to show you this is the type of possibilities that are there today with robotics and AI. And I think the bit that I'm personally excited about is in 30 more years from now, what is that going to look like, right? And so in the course, we'll examine, what that progression is going to look like and what we might see in 30 years. I think it's exciting, but there's also a lot of potential scary stuff there as well, right? I think a lot of people are wary of AI, and rightfully so. And so we'll explore some of the issues that are related to that progression or that exponential progression of AI, both in robotics, but in other fields as well. Okay, so the other part of the introduction was really also looking at data, right? And if you consider artificial intelligence today, if we use an analogy of AI being fire, right? Data is effectively the wood, the fuel that is used to run AI. And if we consider how much data is being created today, it's absolutely unbelievable. So there, in terms of the amount of data, we're basically doubling the entire amount of data in human history into, we're doubling it every 3 years, right? And I think that's an astounding statistic. I think part of that is because a lot of devices that we have today, like our phones, right, it actually makes creating data very easy. You can, with the latest smartphones today, take almost an infinite number of pictures, and you can then paste them to Facebook, Instagram, all sorts of social media, right? So the creation in terms of what's happening with data is actually really exciting. And I think this is a trend that's only going to continue going forward. Now, in terms of the two main types of data, I think it's important to get a handle on what these two main buckets are. So on one side, you've got structured data. On the other side, you've got unstructured data. So structured data is more data that is very easily organized, that's kind of easy to manipulate, easy to analyze. So you could think of this as numbers in a spreadsheet, right? So within Excel, you can run a sum function, you can run an average function. There's many ways you can manipulate that, and generally it's pretty easy to do. Now, when we have unstructured data is where there's a definite lack of structure. So you can think of this like videos, pictures, sound, right? It's harder to get insights from those types of data sources. And so where we're seeing a lot of innovations with AI is actually more on the unstructured data side. How do you look at different sounds and what type of triggers does that involve? How can you look at someone's face and potentially gain insights from that? We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of today's class, at the end of today's talk. But I think it's important to realize that AI is really using a lot of unstructured data And that's where the more exciting developments are actually going to come from. Now, if we consider the growth in data, right? I mentioned before that data is growing, right? And we're doubling it every 3 years. But I think it's important to also realize that over here, unstructured data is actually growing at a much faster rate than structured data. And I think that's really powerful, because what it means is that if AI is really innovating or doing interesting things on the unstructured data side, then we're going to really see AI have a lot more fuel, right? So we talked before about that analogy of data being the wood. And so what we're trying to show here is that there's a lot more wood for AI to actually use. And again, that's further reinforcing the point that I think AI has a lot of value to add going forward. Now, in terms of thinking about data and value, right? What I've done here is the chart actually contains the top 10 biggest companies for that specific time period by market cap. Okay, so in the right-hand column here, 2006, we see that the only kind of technology company was Microsoft, right? And the rest of them were, oil companies or folks that dealt in something other than data. If we fast forward to today, we're really seeing that most of these companies, in terms of the ones that are the most valuable, are really, data companies, right? Microsoft, Apple, Alphabet, which is basically Google's kind of day job, Facebook, Tencent. I mean, these are all companies that are sitting on tons of data, and they happen to be the most valuable companies that are out there. And I don't think that's a coincidence, right? So there's a reason that data and data companies are being seen as the most valuable ones. And so I think the assumption, or the conclusion, I should say, that can be drawn here is that data is really driving value. Now, I think Visa is also an interesting one here, because Visa has a lot of data, right? They see the how people use their credit cards. So they see what they buy, they see where they go, they see what time of day they make these purchases. And I think that is all very, very powerful data. So even other companies that might be lower down on this list, I would be willing to have a friendly bet with you that they are also data companies as well, or use data in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so that concludes the introductory part of today. The one area of AI that I wanted to dive a little bit deeply with you is something called neural networks, right? And so neural networks are effectively inspired by nerve cells in the brain. And on a very simple level, with a nerve cell, you basically have an input, right? So these little lights that are coming into the cell, they go in, there's a process that happens in there, and ultimately there's an output, right? And so that's very similar to an actual neural network, where you have an input, you have a process, and ultimately you have an output. And within the sort of network infrastructure, if you like, these circles are called nodes, and each node is connected to another node via what we call connections, right? And that's how you make a network. You have nodes, you have connections, and that's how the whole thing kind of fits together, okay? Now, when we have another phrase in neural networks called deep learning, right? And basically what deep learning is rather than have one process layer, you start to have many process layers, okay? And when you have more process layers, the idea is that you ultimately have more accurate output. That's really the point of increasing the process layers. However, the more connections that you have in a neural network, the more processing power you need. And so that's always a challenge for a lot of companies. They want accurate output, but at the same time, they realize they have to pay more because it requires more power in terms of electricity, in terms of computing power, to be able to get those guesses. So that's always a trade-off, right? How much are you willing to live with? And I think often, many people assume, hey, my AI needs to be 99% accurate. But that's not actually true. And that depends on the business use case. So let's think about something like autopilot on a plane, for example. Now, if something goes wrong with autopilot, there's a big problem, right? Because a plane starts to fall out of the sky. But let's take example of Netflix, right? So with Netflix, let's say it's giving you recommendations. Even if it gives you the wrong program recommendation, the negative consequence of getting it wrong is relatively low, right? Worst case scenario, you don't pick that suggestion, you go watch something else. So really for a lot of companies, how they want to think about this stuff is not just looking at the technology, it's about looking at the business use case. And part of that business use case is figuring out what is an acceptable level of accuracy that you're willing to live with given the budget that you have. Okay, so again, when we start talking about the business of frontier technologies, it's not really always about the tech. It's very important to understand the business side as well. And that's why I think in the future, a lot of MBAs, a lot of folks that study business and data analytics who are not necessarily technical programmers, I still think have a big part to play in the coming AI revolution. Okay, so if you're sitting out there and you're worried, hey, I've never programmed, I've never done anything, technical, it doesn't mean you can't be part of AI, right? You bring your business acumen, your business knowledge, and we combine that with the technology. Okay, so it's not these things acting independently. You always need both the business or subject matter expert working with the technology person. So if you're worried about it, if you're scared about being involved in AI, I would highly, highly tell you that that's not the case. And it's also partly why I showed my background at the beginning, because I don't actually have a technical background in terms of programming. I was a business guy, right? But you actually find that, with your business knowledge, with your business acumen, you can really add value to an AI project. And I think that's very, very important going forward. Okay, so I wanted to deal with a practical example of neural networks, because I do think it's important that you guys at least understand how this input, process, output feature actually works, okay? And so when they're talking about neural networks, they will often talk about training a model, okay? And what training a model is really about figuring out a methodology that you use to achieve your business objective. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a potentially theoretical neural network that recognizes digits, okay? So digits meaning we're going to give it an input, some sort of picture, and we're going to ask it, tell me if this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 9. Okay, so which number is it? That's where the question that we're asking. And the methodology that we're going to use is we're going to cut each picture or each digit into 3 parts: top, middle, and bottom. Okay, so ultimately the idea is after doing this cutting, hopefully it will help the guessing or the output. Okay, that's the idea. So let's actually do this, right? And let's take the number 8. So we take the number 8 and we cut it into 3 parts. We have the top, the middle, and the bottom. And you'll notice that if we take the middle, right, and we look at what that actually looks like in isolation, it's basically an X, okay? So if we go back to all the potential outputs that we have, so all these numbers here, the question that we should really be thinking about is, which other number has an X in the middle? And we'll run down, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And as you go down, you notice that no other number has an X. Likewise, if we consider the number 0, right? In the middle of 0, there's just a blank space. Or ultimately, there's like 2 lines, right? The edges of the 0. Now, if we do the same exercise again, and we run down all the digits, we'll notice that actually there's only 0 that looks like that, okay? So when we say training a neural network, right? What we're effectively doing is that we're changing the strength of the connections. And that strength of the connections in network kind of speak is called the weights. Okay, that's how strong the connections are. And so basically what happens here is the connection between the middle node and X is equal to 8 becomes very strong, right? And the reason that happens is because if the middle guy or the middle node sees an X, it's almost sure to be the number 8. And likewise, if the middle node sees a blank space, right, or those 2, the piece here where you've got those 2 lines, it's almost sure to be a 0. And so that's why when we're training a neural network, what we're actually doing is we're adjusting the weights of the connections between the nodes to increase the accuracy of the output. And so at the end of the day, that's really what training a neural network is all about, right? You give it the inputs, you have the process, and you refine what's going on. So you can actually go away and get a PhD in neural networks, right? I've covered it in about 8 minutes here. But the point is, this can become much more complicated very, very fast. But I think the overarching theme is still generally the same, right? And you can use this output for 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can use the output to detect Roger's face, Kevin's face, someone else's face. There's many different outputs that you can ultimately have a neural network give you, but the principle is still the same. Okay, so in this course, we'll talk a lot about the principles, right? Because ultimately, whichever industry you're in, whatever use case you have for AI, that will be independent to you. However, the overarching theme or the overarching methodology will still be the same, irrespective of what type of inputs and what type of outputs you ultimately use. Okay, so I think within the course, right, well, in addition to talking about the technologies, we'll also talk a little bit about the limitations as well. And so in this example, what's actually going on is they were training a model to actually not look at typed digits, but handwritten digits, right? And as you can imagine, and I don't know about you guys, but my handwriting has certainly gotten a lot worse since I was at school. Part of it's because there's no practice, right? And so you imagine if some people start writing the number 8, right? But if they start writing 8 with the cross in the top part of the number, right, or the top third of the number, then the AI that we developed here, right, for this thing would break down. So again, even when you build your AI, right, and when you're looking at your technologies, there's always going to be limitations. And so part of the course will also be focusing a little bit on what are the limitations of certain types of technologies and how can we address those limitations going forward. But notice, right, that here the use case changed. Before we had the use case of pick up the typed digit, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here, the use case become handwritten digits. And because it's handwritten, the tool that you use changes, right? So in terms of our definition before, AI is a tool to achieve an objective. If the objective changes, the tool should change as well, okay? So those concepts are examples of the types of things that we're going to examine in this course. Okay, so the third part for tonight is really going to be concentrating on what does the future look like with AI? And I think this is really important because it really looks at what's coming going forward. Now, in those 3 pillars that I talked about initially, computing, storage, and data transport, the limiting factor out of those 3, or the one that's kind of, at the weakest point now, or holding things back, is actually data transport. And I think something that's coming in the future, and you may have heard of it, it's called 5G. I think that will change the game for a lot of AI and a lot of frontier technologies as well. Because at the end of the day, this 5G concept relates to what we call the 5th generation of mobile communication networks, okay? And if you look at the screen on your phone, right, next to the signal bar, you'll actually see a little icon that indicates to you what type of mobile communication network your phone is currently using. So you might see 2G, 3G plus, 3G, there's many different ones. Generally for most folks, and I'm not really sure about Bangkok, but my sense is you guys are probably close to 4G. So, the indication is always there on your phone or on your device. And if you consider what were previous iterations or previous generations, right? Back in the day, we used to have these old school phones, right? And they were called landlines. And then people literally picked up the phone, dialed the number, and talked to someone. Now today, a lot of people don't talk on the phone. Again, that's fine, but it's important to realize that in terms of the history, phones started with voice only, right? And then eventually, voice only became data and voice. So the first kind of usage of data was actually what they called SMS, right? Or the short message system. And so you could actually send text to your friends. Right? So you didn't necessarily need them to pick up the phone and talk to you. You could send them a message. And then we got 3G. So in 3G, you had the voice, you had the data, but now you also had the ability to send low resolution videos, right? So people started to get really excited about this type of stuff. And today, we're at 4G, which can basically do data, voice, and video, but higher resolution video, more clear voice, and larger amounts of data. Okay, so that's currently where we sit in terms of 4G. So the question that a lot of people have is, what does 5G look like, right? What's the difference? Why is it any better? And I think one of the ways to think about this is actually to consider what is the capability, right? And so if we think about downloading a 2-hour high-resolution film, right? If you had 3G, that would take you about 26 hours. 4G, it's about 6 minutes. And 5G would take you just 3.6 seconds. Okay, so again, exponential increases in productivity. Right? This is not linear. This is a curve that really gets very high at the end. And I think that's very important to consider to understand how the exponential increases are happening with 5G. And with regards to 3.6 seconds, right, it actually means that it would take us longer to figure out what we wanted to watch rather than actually being able to download that movie. And that will fundamentally change not only just how we see movies and how we consume media, but I think it's going to fundamentally change business models as well. Okay, and so part of the course is also going to be focusing on business model innovation and how are business models today going to change in the future. It's an area that I'm also very excited about, and I think folks such as yourselves who specialize on the business side, when it comes to commercializing a lot of this AI technology, that's the type of thoughts that we're going to have. That's the type of thinking that we're going to have to do. And I think it's important to then understand what are the enabling technologies and what impacts that they're ultimately going to have. Now, I think part of the impacts that they're going to have is also a big impact on the future of work, right? So when I say future of work, what I mean is how is AI actually going to address or adjust jobs of the future? And to understand this part, I think it's important to realize that many people have a fear of AI. And one of the sources of this fear is really what or how or why or when is AI going to come and take my job, right? A lot of people are very worried about that. Half the time when we do consulting and we go in and talk to clients and people, this is their primary fear. And I think one of the ways you can address that fear is to think about what is AI good at and what are human beings good at. Okay, so it's important because these tend to be very complementary, and let me explain why. So when we have AI, right, AI tends to be good at doing very repetitive tasks very well, right? So the same thing again and again and again in a very defined and narrow scope. Whereas with human beings, they tend to be better at tasks that require less computing or processing, but can have a wider scope. So let me give you an example. Let's say we had pictures of animals, and we asked the AI, is this a cat, is this a dog or not a dog? Okay, that's actually very easy for an AI to answer because once you using a neural network or machine learning or whatever it is, once you train an AI to recognize a dog, it will then just take every other picture and compare it and then just give you yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And you can look at thousands of pictures, right? Much quicker than any human being ever could, right? So it's very good at that. But let's change the question a little bit. And let's ask the AI, what animal is this? That is actually a very hard question for an AI to answer because it needs to be trained for every possible animal that's out there. For a human being, through our experience in life, right, we've seen what a fish looks like, what a shark looks like, what a lion looks like. We have all that in our brains. And so for us to figure out what animal is this is actually a very easy question. But for an AI, that's a very, very difficult question. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of peace of mind as to thinking about AI and how it won't take over all jobs tomorrow. Okay, I think the idea is, at least in the near and medium term, it's going to be about how are AI and humans complementary as opposed to fighting with each other, replacing each other. And I think the second part of this, to think about is one aspect of this replacement stuff is capability, but the other side is also trust, right? So if we were all sitting together in a room, I would ask all of you, how many would be comfortable getting on a plane with no human pilot? And my sense is a lot of people would say no, like I want a human pilot there. But no one ever asked the question, oh, what's the pilot like? Did they drink a couple of glasses of wine before the flight? Did they get enough sleep the night before? Did they have a fight with their partner the day before, right? No one ever asked that question. I think it's an immediate view that, oh, if there is a human being on this plane, I feel more comfortable, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But what that means is for a AI or a frontier technology, you need the technology to be capable, but you also need people to trust the technology as well. If you don't have both, it is actually very hard to commercialize something. So again, we're going to talk a little bit in the course about how you build trust, right? And that's not easy because that is not a science. That is much more of an art. And we've had a lot of experience in encountering resistance to change, resistance to AI. And so I'll share a little bit about my views about how we can do some of this stuff. Now, in terms of your future job, right? I think one of the inputs to a lot of this should actually be thinking about what jobs are less likely to be automated and what jobs are more likely to be automated. So what's going on in this chart is that on the left side, we see jobs that are less likely to be automated. On the right side, we see jobs that are more likely to be automated. And then On the y-axis, we actually see how much these jobs get paid, right? So what's the salary or how much money do you get for doing these jobs? So ideally, you want to be paid a lot. So you want to be higher up on this curve in terms of height. And you also want to be on the left side, right? So this is the good corner. This good corner means I get paid a lot and I'm less likely to be automated. Now, if we go to the bad corner, which is the diagonally opposite one, you'll notice that we have a lot of cashiers, waiters, retail sales. Like these are very much jobs that are routine, repetitive, right? And so I think these are the jobs in future that are going to be at risk going forward. One other thing that I'd like to mention here is that I actually think, although this looks at jobs as automatable or not automatable, I actually think you can go one step deeper, right? So think of it this way. Any job that you have consists of tasks, right? So let's say job A consists of 10 tasks. Generally, you won't have every task being automatable, but there'll be some, right? So maybe it's 7, maybe it's 3. And I think even as you look at any of the jobs here, right, even at the chief executive or the physician or surgeon level, there are going to be some tasks there that are automatable. I think what this is really showing is these are jobs where most of the tasks are not automatable. Okay, so I think don't think of job automation as 1 and 0. It's not a binary thing, right? It's a spectrum, and the spectrum is based upon how many tasks in that job can be automated. And if many tasks or all the tasks can be automated, then I think we are entering this dangerous area where it's very easily, or it's very likely that that job ultimately will be automated in the future. Now, if you're with me in terms of that idea of AI and human beings working together, right, in the future, then I think what is important for us in terms of personal development is actually to think about how do we future-proof ourselves going forward. And I think the way we do that is actually by thinking about what are skill sets that are hard to automate. So in my view, things like building relationships and trust, sales skills, right? If you want to sell a can of Coke or Sprite versus you want to sell a car, they're two different things, but the skill set of being able to sell is still, I think, pretty consistent. And if we consider finance, right, and I'm not sure if any of you are working in the finance industry, but in my view, I was doing private banking when I was in finance, and I think private banking is actually going to be one of those jobs or functions that actually survives a lot of the AI automation, because many people want personal service, right? They want the ultra high net worth rich people want a person to talk to, not a robot. And so I think because of that, you will see certain jobs like private banking, certain things like sales, high-end sales, concierge type of services. I think those will be around for a while. I also think skill sets like empathy, critical thinking, creativity, these are also going to be skill sets that I think that are hard to automate in the future. One that I think doesn't get that much fanfare is storytelling, right? So storytelling is really that art of persuasion. If you imagine a CFO, right, every quarter they have to give an earnings call. And so on that earnings call, they are not just reading the numbers. They're actually telling people what is the story behind the numbers, right? Why was there a big negative here? Why was there a big drop here? Why was there a big increase here? Right? They're conveying a story. And I was actually recently at a storytelling workshop, and the instructor was actually saying that, to tell an effective story, when you do tell an effective story, you actually have physiological changes in the brain. Okay, and so what they mean by that is, if you tell a story that allows the audience to relate to the speaker, then the brain releases what's called oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone, right? And so the bonding hormone makes you feel closer to the speaker, and that releases oxytocin. And then if you can actually tell a story that is exciting, right, or that people are on edge, right, it releases a hormone or a chemical in the brain called cortisol. That's the stress hormone. It what triggers the fight or flight response, right? So if when you're conveying a story or you're telling a story, you can have the audience in their brains, if they're releasing oxytocin and cortisol, people are 20 times more likely to remember what you say. Okay, so again, that skill then becomes very important, right? And I think, again, it's something that not many people talk about, but if during the course of your whether it's your studies at AIT or whether it's just your personal career development, I really think storytelling is very, very important. So just keep that in mind as you think about your personal development going forward. And then lastly, human common sense is also very important as well. When we see the output from an AI, it's very important to do a sanity check to make sure that what the AI is spitting out is correct and actually makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that you'll be surprised the number of times something comes out by an AI and it's really stupid. It's pretty high, and many people don't take that view of I need to use my common sense and check this. So that human common sense is also something that AI and a lot of these new technologies don't have. Now, to end tonight, I actually want to challenge two of these though, empathy and creativity. And the reason I want to challenge them is because this list of things that are hard to automate, I think will change in the future. As technology gets better, as these frontier technologies become really more powerful, I think this list will change. So I don't want you to come back, in 5 years down the line and say, Kevin, you said empathy and creativity were definitely human or hard to automate, but now they're not. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to just show you some examples where AI has actually been doing some stuff in empathy and been doing some stuff in creativity. So we look at empathy, right? Empathy is really about figuring out how someone feels and then doing something about it. So I think that doing something about it is still probably a very human piece, but understanding how someone feels, right? That's actually an area where AI has been used quite a bit more. There's a branch of AI called emotive analytics. And what emotive analytics is about is really looking at your facial expressions and then trying to figure out what are your feelings, right? How do you feel based on those facial expressions? So in this example, what's actually happening is Mark Zuckerberg, who's the CEO of Facebook, is actually being interviewed at the Senate, right? And so the senator over here asks him a question. He says, how does Facebook make money? And in response, Mark Zuckerberg says, Senator, we run ads, okay? And this screenshot is done at exactly the point where he says, Senator, we run ads. Now let's look at the output of the emotive analytics here, because I think it's interesting. 99% indicates that Mark Zuckerberg is irritated, right? And so if you think about it, he's probably sitting there and wondering to himself, how does a senator not know the actual answer to this, right? What's actually going on? And I think the challenge for Zuckerberg is he's probably irritated because senators, they define technology policy, they put in together a lot of regulation, and not knowing how Facebook makes money, it seems to be irritating Mark Zuckerberg. Now let's look at the senator over here. We actually see with 92% certainty, he's feeling joy, right? And that's a weird one. And maybe, he's not, maybe it's not that he doesn't know how Facebook makes money. Maybe he just enjoys, giving Mark Zuckerberg a hard time, right? We don't really know. We can't get into their brains. But again, I think the important part here is that the concept of empathy, maybe AI can actually start to detect facial emotions, right? And so we should be thinking about empathy, but we should also be thinking that AI at some point might be able to do empathy. And I think that's an interesting philosophical question going forward. Now, the other one is creativity, right? And so with creativity, what happened here is that there's every year there's a conference in Barcelona called the Mobile World Congress. And so what they do is it's a technology conference. And so what actually happened here is that they looked at call him an artist or a sculptor or whatever, but there's a guy in Barcelona, or was a guy, I should say, in Barcelona, called Gaudi, right? And so Gaudi designed a lot of famous stuff around Barcelona. Some of the parks, there's a very famous church called La Sagrada Familia. He's done a lot of this stuff. And so what they did is they took a lot of the works by Gaudi, they put it in a machine, and they asked the machine to create something inspired by Gaudi, okay? So ultimately, this picture is what it came up with. Now, I'll let the art historians among us decide, is it Gaudi-like or not? But the interesting part is, they opened up the black box, right, the AI, and they started to see that within Gaudi's works, there was actually a lot of mathematical relationships, right? So for example, like if there's a vertical beam, the corresponding horizontal beam might be 2/3 of the length. And so as they looked at a lot of his works, they started to figure out that there were actually a lot of patterns, right, and mathematical patterns. So I think something to think about, and perhaps a question I'll leave with you to go ahead and think about in the future, is what exactly is creativity, right? Is it something that us humans just dream about? Or is it a sort of collection of all the experiences we've had, right? And therefore the output is based on those experiences. Because if it's the second one, then if we can put all those experiences into a machine, could we not replicate them, right? And again, I just think it's an interesting philosophical question to think about when it comes to creativity and the question of, can AI actually be creative? Now, the final slide that I wanted to talk about is really looking at what is the actual output, right? And what's actually happening in terms of the market with regards to AI. So in the art world, this was actually the first picture that was done 100% by an AI. And the data set for this was 15,000 kind of similar pictures from that rough time period. Now, again, I'll let the art historians make the decision on good or bad. To me, this looks like just a picture of a guy, right? There's nothing special in my view. But when it went to get sold at auction, the initial estimate for the sale was between 7,000 and 10,000 US dollars. It ended up being sold for 432,500. Okay, so look, art is a really kind of interesting and hard to value asset, right? So I think a lot of these will be based on perhaps metrics that are not related to AI or future technology. But what I wanted to show you was this is the output that AI is creating, and people are willing to pay for it, right? So if people are willing to pay for it, my sense is more of this is going to happen. Right? So again, I think the larger question here is this really art? What is creativity, right? Many very interesting philosophical questions. And that's kind of the example of what we'll cover in the last part of the class, which is, the future implications of AI. So I'm personally extremely excited to be teaching this class. Hopefully this gave you some insight into what the class is really going to be about. I'm happy now to open it to Q&A. And before I do that, I just want to thank everyone for their time. I know it's pretty late in the evening. And feel free in the future, whether you decide to take the course or not, would love to connect with you guys. I talk about AI all the time. So feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I often post a lot of articles about AI as well. So even if you're just interested in the topic, always happy to have discussions and chats about that. So that's for the future, but for now, I'd be happy to open the floor to questions to any that you guys might have. Thanks.
Thank you ever so much, Kevin. Much appreciated. And we actually have one question already in the Q&A box. So can I remind everybody who's listening at the moment that we have the Q&A box. Could you please go through and use that for when you want to ask questions? We've actually got 2 questions there, Kevin. So over to you.
Perfect. So just for the benefit of everyone else, I'll read the question out, okay, because I know you may or may not be able to see it. So the first question says, you mentioned that private banking might still escape AI, but hasn't AI already changed the way of banking, e.g. online banking, mobile banking, et cetera, will banks still escape AI? Yeah, so great question, right? I think banking is definitely changing. There's no question about that. I think with regards to a lot of the online banking, mobile banking, et cetera, they're just changing the interface, right? So before you would go into a branch, today you go through your computer. So to me, that's not really AI. That's just changing the interface or the method in which you're interacting with the bank. That's still definitely change. And so I think that's great. And there's a lot of stuff going on there. But I think when we're talking about AI, I think the larger question is, how do we take some of the data that's coming from these things and ultimately use AI to deal with that? And so we just think about digital wallets, right? Before, when you had cash, you could never truly see the full financial picture of someone. But today, now we can, right? If you use digital wallets, you can see who you paid, you can see how much you paid, you can see what you started to buy. And I think that's where we're going to start seeing AI being introduced into banking. Right? A lot of that data, which you couldn't record before, you now can record, and therefore you can do analytics based off of that. So that's how I feel that AI is going to be changing banking. And I think a big reason for that is we're going to have access to data that we previously didn't have before. Okay, but that's a great question. I think the caveat here is private banking is a little different because the emphasis there is still on a very personal, high touch type of service. And so I think that's a subset of banking that will change less. But I think with this online banking and digital wallets, I think for the mass market, that's where we're going to see more of this stuff coming. And there's going to be a lot of that, right? So as we see more of this with mass market, we're going to see a lot more data being produced. And I think that's where AI is going to have a great opportunity to be able to do that. Okay, and then the second question I have here is when it comes to an AI-based startup, what's the best way to enter with minimum capital and financial investment? Yeah, Kavinda, thank you for the question. I think it's a difficult one because, again, when you're training your AI, right, you tend to need a lot of data. And in my view, the companies that are going to win in this AI battle are probably going to fall into two buckets. Bucket one is going to be those companies that have a ton of data. So you think of the Googles, the Apples, the Facebooks of the world, right? They're sitting on a mountain of data. And so they have a lot of fuel or a lot of wood, right, for their AI to work on. Now on the startup side, I think where we're going to see the winners are going to be AI that is very focused and very narrow, right? Remember how we said that AI is very good at doing certain narrow tasks very, very well? I think for most AI-based startups, so smaller companies, they're going to come off the flavor that they do one specific thing really, really well. And so in terms of when you're saying what's the best way to enter, right? I think the challenge is it depends on the use case. So remember we said AI is a tool to achieve an objective. So how you develop your tool or how you train your tool is really dependent upon what use case you use. So for certain use cases, you will require very little capital financial investment. For other use cases, because of the data you need to train the model or because of certain regulatory pieces, maybe you might need higher amounts of capital financial investment. So without understanding which industry or what specific tool you're trying to develop, it's very hard to say how much money you'll need. I would think that for the AI-based startups that are going to win, they should have a very clear focus in terms of what they're doing. And hopefully that's narrow enough that they can train their AI models very, very well so that they become a leader in that specific niche field. Because if an AI startup was to come to me and says, Kevin, we can do everything, I would be very reluctant to believe that. If Google comes to me and says, hey, we have an AI that can do everything, I would be more willing to potentially agree with them. Okay? All right, so thank you for that question, Kavinda. We've got a few more questions, so I'll just take them as they pop in here. So the next question says, what are the required core competencies of a company to win in the AI era? Okay, and the second related part to that is China or India with large populations tend to win in the AI era, question mark. So let me take the second one first. And I think why China is an interesting area for AI is because a lot of this really depends on how easy is it to collect data. Right? So if you look at the US or you look at a lot of other countries, they have a lot of privacy laws and they have a lot of regulations that are there, right? And for a business, and we can debate the ethical right or wrong here, but I want to leave that out for a second. If we purely think of this in business terms, more regulation or more laws makes data acquisition more expensive, okay? So if you have a country where you have a large population, i.e. a lot of potential data points, and then you also have a system where it's cheaper to get the data, those are probably going to be areas where AI is going to do well. Okay, so I think China definitely falls into that bucket. I think a lot of other countries, have large populations, but maybe the ease or the cost of getting data is a little bit less, right? So I think large population is important, but I also think what are the costs of acquiring data? That is a very, very big input into figuring out, whether or who is going to win in the AI era. The first question was core competencies of a company to win, right? So I really think the core competencies, and if I could boil it down to one, it's identifying a good business use case that a lot of people have a need for. I think at the end of the day, if you can get that part right, then getting the data and getting the AI is the second level of what you need to worry about. But the first part of it is really thinking about identify a good business use case, identify a good pain point, and if you can do that, then I think you can commercialize something very, very well. Okay, so that would be my my answer in terms of that one. Probably one other core competency that I think is also important is having management who's open, right? And I think part of how you do that is you have management who's open to new ideas and willing to look at AI education. So something that we do quite a lot is a few of our workshops are often geared towards the C-suite guys. And the C-suite guys often come in with this idea of, hey, we need to be more open, but I'm currently afraid of it. And so a lot of our workshops look at making C-suite individuals less afraid of AI. And I think once you have that, then generally you tend to see them more open and being more willing to do AI projects. Okay? All right. So next question here says, you spent your career in finance. Do you consider crypto as an outcome of AI? Also, what kind of changes do you think AI can make in the field of investment banking? Okay, I could literally talk about this for an hour, but let me distill it down. So in terms of crypto and AI, right? So for me, cryptocurrencies, the larger technology that's sits on top of cryptocurrencies is something called blockchain, right? Many of you might be familiar with it, many of you may not, but on a very high level, blockchain is really about the storing of data, okay? And AI is more about the analysis of the data. So I think there is a distinction between blockchain and AI, and I am definitely not an expert on the blockchain side. I think there is a small area of overlap where AI and blockchain come together, where blockchain provides the data and AI does the analysis, but I still think they are, in essence, different technologies, okay? In certain cases, one can be the input for the other, but I still think they're pretty separate. So that's how I think kind of crypto and AI sort of have a bit of a line between them. The second part says, what kind of changes do you think AI can make in the field of investment banking? Okay, so very many of them, but let me highlight the one that I think is most important. So investment banking is really about putting sources of capital and users of capital together, right? So there's a matching process that's typically done there. And right now, a lot of that industry is really about relationships, right? Yeah, a banker knows CEO here, a banker knows investor there, puts them together, charges a lot of money. Now, with something like AI, you can actually figure out what are better algorithms or better ways to do matching, right? And so this is not only something that affects investment banking, this affects, the middleman and the intermediary in a lot of different industries. And if you can do the matching better, right, with AI, then I think ultimately you will see these intermediaries, their profit margins will definitely shrink. Right? So a lot of industries that have a lot of these middlemen are actually very worried about that. If you look at the insurance industry, for example, we often see that insurance brokers today are worried that tomorrow everyone's going to buy online insurance directly with the insurer, right? And the interesting thing for the insurer is they have the data on all the people. So then if they use AI, they could actually target very specific insurance products that really make sense for different people. Right? And so I think that's where we'll start to see the general concept of intermediaries start to disappear. And I think that's true of investment banking, but it's also true of many, many other industries as well. So certainly some business model innovation coming and some disruption coming there as well. But yeah, good question. Okay, then I've got a few more, so I'll just take them in order. So Raphael's question is, what do you think about AI's opportunity for the fashion world and industry in terms of apparel, design, branding, and marketing? I haven't heard a lot about it. I'm interested to make a business from it. All right, Raphael. So a couple of areas that I think are interesting. Something for you to look at is a technology called smart mirrors, right? And so a couple of retail stores in the future are actually trying to put smart mirrors in their stores so that people can actually, smooth out the retail process, right? So let's say you put on a shirt, right? And it's a white shirt. It fits really well, but you want to think about, what does a blue shirt look on me, right? So the solution today is you take off the white shirt, you go pick up the blue shirt, you come back to the mirror, and then you put it on, right? But with a smart mirror, you can actually change in real time, and in the mirror image you're looking at, you can change the color of that white shirt to a blue shirt. And you can see, how does it look on me, right? And I think in general, a lot of the AI opportunities are about smoothing the frictions in that kind of retail process, right? Whether it's payments, whether it's kind of fitting room experience, whether it's just kind of user experience in the store, whether it's having somebody come over to you when you seem confused when you're looking at a product. I think there's so many opportunities for AI. We've had a lot of companies on the retail space even come to us with emotive analytics, right? Because they were saying that when you have emotive analytics, a lot of purchasing decisions are actually inherently emotional. Right? Why do you buy the blue shoes versus the red shoes? In many cases, it's just like, hey, I just kind of liked it, right? And so if you really think that's the case, then imagine the power for marketers if they're able to see how people feel when they look at their product, right? Like if I have this can of Sprite in front of me, for example, if the marketer could see Kevin feels X when he sees the can of Sprite, then that's very powerful, right? Is the feeling that I have consistent with the brand values? Is the marketing, giving the right message, right? There's so many opportunities there, and I think it's really, really going to be exciting for AI's, ability or AI's scope in the marketing sector. So I think plenty of opportunities. If you haven't heard of them, I think Google a lot of retail experience stuff with AI. You'll see a ton of stuff that's actually happening. I think probably the other area is segmentation as well, right? So AI is being used to segment customers into different buckets, and then ultimately also provide them with personalized products or personalized experiences, which I think is very important going forward as well. Okay, and then a question from Shivesh here says, which tools do you think MBA students must know for analytics? Yeah, that's a good question, right? So Shivesh, I think part of it will depend on industry, right? I think one thing that a lot of people feel when they think about AI is that they think, oh, we need to know Python or we need to know a programming language. And the truth is, Excel is actually a very, very powerful tool, right? So off the bat, I would still tip my hat to Excel because it can do a lot of the analytics that we typically would ask for. So I think there's a view that you have to learn Python or you have to learn a programming language. I don't necessarily think that's true. Now, where I think learning a programming language is useful, so something like Python, is actually to communicate with folks who are on the technical side. So if, let's say, I say, hey, get me a glass of water, right? As a business student, people would say, okay, I'll just go get you a glass of water and come back. But for someone with an engineering or programming mind, that is more about take the glass, tilt the water jug 30 degrees, let the glass fill 70%, reduce the tilt of the jug to 0 degrees, right? It's a different type of thinking. And so if you know introductory programming or know some of that stuff, I think that for AI is very helpful because it helps your communication with the technical people, right? And I found that actually for me to be something very useful. So we have a tech team in the Philippines, and so talking to them is a lot easier, that now that I know, the basic introductory parts of programming, because I think that's helpful in my discussions with them. It's not about, hey, can you guys do X? It's about, hey, look, I need steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 done. Can you help me with that? And generally that tends to be a much better communication dynamic, right? Because a lot of that tech team of ours, they've been programming since they were 8 years old. There's no way I can ever catch up to that, but what I can do is understand how they think so I can better communicate with them. Okay, and then I have a question here from Kavinda as well. It says, interesting to see that Google is not the top of the list of data-driven companies that have been the most valuable. Any thoughts? Yeah, so Kavinda, in that slide, right, Alphabet is actually kind of the Google equivalent now. So Google a while ago split up, and they had one kind of moonshot division, and then they had one kind of regular stuff that they always do. So in that chart, right, it's really Alphabet that's there, and so that's actually the Google representation. So they definitely are in the top 10 data-driven companies for sure. But apologies if I didn't make that clear with regards to the title of Alphabet as the company. Okay, so Roger, I think that might be all the questions that we had. I know we're also running over time as well, so we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, so let me say to everybody who's here at the moment, thank you so much for the questions that you've asked. We've had many of these webinars in the past, and every time I go through and brief the guest speaker, I do say to them, if we don't have any questions, then I will ask you 3 or 4 questions, and I had them written down on my notepad. And you've asked all of the questions that Kevin would like to have answered anyway, which is fantastic. And it seems to mirror what you had when you spoke to the alumni of Harvard Business School this morning. So I'm delighted that you've gone through and shown up tonight, asked the questions you've asked of such good quality as well, which are comparable to other business schools around the world. So that's all credit to you. I know that a lot of you are going to be doing the Business Analytics Digital Transformation Program anyway. So you're going to have 40 hours with Kevin as he goes through that particular course in August and September. So this is your early peek at Kevin. and Kevin's got hopefully a good image of you this evening. So thank you very much for turning up tonight, Kevin. Thank you very much for your time as well. Look forward to introducing you again in August and September. Very much hope that by the time we get to September, it will be easy to travel from Hong Kong to Bangkok so you can meet everybody in person. I think in August, that might be rather difficult, but it will be something which hopefully will happen in September. But thank you very much.
Great, and thank you everyone for attending as well. This was really fun. Appreciate it, and thanks Roger for having me.
Good. And Pipat, I see that you've asked a question actually on the chat box about was this session recorded? It is recorded, and you can send me a message, and I'll be happy to go through and talk to Kevin about if we are allowed to share this with you. Okay, but could you send me an email? You have my address. I'm pretty sure you do. So please send that through to me. Okay. Good evening, Kevin. It's coming up to 10 o'clock in Hong Kong. So thank you so much. Everybody else, I will see you again at future events in the future. Thank you very much. Goodbye and good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.